Hey guys, this is Tom. I just wanted to post this quick comment. I hope I can keep it relatively short. In regard to a topic that's been going around on mostly Facebook and in a YouTube video in the last few days. And it all began a few days ago when I posted on Facebook a note containing 3 very detailed questions to mostly anarcho-capitalists. These 3 questions were the first one was about structural violence. The second one was about kind of the transition into their proposed free market world society. And the third one was about the topic of praxeology. And so far, only one of the anarcho-capitalist camp has replied to only one of these questions. At least he tried to in some way. Namely the structural violence question. And as you can imagine, a lot of discussions resulted from that, and in the end it seemed to motivate some ANCAPs like Michael Shanklin and Victor Pross to actually think about the topic a little bit, so much that they in the end decided to record an almost hour-long video chat about the topic of structural violence, together with a third guy named Richard. And I wanted to address this video quickly if I can, some of the points made in there and also some of the points that were discussed in the aftermath of the video, if you will, on Facebook again. So, yeah, the video. It was kind of I guess a world record, at least to my knowledge, for the most logical fallacies presented within less than an hour. As you can imagine, everything the usual suspects were there, from central planning to supercomputers and robots that would be used in a resource-based economy, of course. So, yeah, all of those good old things that are nowhere in any official Zeitgeist movement materials, can be found nowhere there. I would also like to make this a little sub-challenge, if you will. Any ANCAPs out there, if you can find anything in any materials of the Zeitgeist movement or any materials regarding a natural law resource-based economy that actually talk about society being controlled by a supercomputer or central planning being in effect in a natural law resource-based economy, please present them to us, because I haven't been able to find them so far, because obviously all that stuff is bullshit. None of that really comes from the Zeitgeist movement or the train of thought that is underlying a natural law resource-based economy. It's all just false and wrong associations made with our train of thought, and that are just being used basically to denunciate the whole idea. Another one of these false assumptions or associations is the always popular idea that the Zeitgeist movement is against individualism and wants to take private property away from people, all that bullshit. So no, that is also, of course, completely incorrect. The basic idea behind a natural law resource-based economy is actually, among other things, to enable individuality in people, because you need only take a look around today and you can see that individuality is a complete joke. First of all, most people just don't have the time or the means to actually live out their individuality, and even if they could, there is so much bullshit in commercials and in movies and in the news and everything that, well, everyone is normalized to a certain degree, and there are these social pressures that basically don't even allow you to be a real individual, and all of that is something that a natural law resource-based economy is actually meant to cure. And the other thing about private property, just scroll down here on YouTube when you're in the list of my videos, and about 10 videos down you're going to find a video titled Private Property in a Resource-Based Economy. I made an almost 1 hour long video just about this topic. It's simply incorrect that there is no private property in a resource-based economy. People simply can have all the personal private property they want to have, and a resource-based economy, just to sum it up real quickly, simply will only come into existence at a point when enough people understand that it's beneficial for themselves, for their best own self-interest, to share property, to share things that today are private property with other people. And I'm not talking about sharing your toothbrush or sharing your socks or bullshit like that, obviously. I'm talking about things like a forest, a field, a mine, things of the economy, what we really can call things that are private property in the economy today. It just makes no sense that these things belong to people privately. It makes sense that they belong to everyone and are shared. So, no, we're not against individualism or individuality. We're not against personal or private property, and most certainly is it not the plan to take private property from anyone. The whole idea of the Zeitgeist movement, of the train of thought leading to a natural law resource-based economy, is voluntarism. We're with you guys. On this topic, on voluntarism, we're in the same boat completely. That is another thing that comes up sometimes, not that often anymore. Some of you guys, some of you NCAPs, seem to have understood or accepted the fact that we are also voluntarists. It is completely absurd even to assume that we would want to force anyone into anything, or especially into a natural law resource-based economy, because you may have heard that in the years that we've been talking about this now, a natural law resource-based economy is based on voluntary sharing and voluntary cooperation of the people. So think about this for just 10 seconds. If you force a population, a society, into a system, do you think they're gonna cooperate and share voluntarily after you force them into it? That doesn't make any sense. If you force them into it, then there's no voluntary cooperation and sharing. So it's inherently, logically impossible to force anyone into a natural law resource-based economy. So obviously that is not our plan. The plan is to educate people also voluntarily. No, we're not talking about strapping anyone into a re-education chair or any such bullshit. We're talking about, well, you know what the Zeitgeist movement does. We make movies, we do lectures, put them on YouTube, we write books, texts, we talk to people directly in events, on the street, wherever. So that kind of voluntary education that is not forced on anybody. And if at some point through this voluntary education enough people voluntarily want a resource-based economy, then they can do it. And this is also something that, dear anarcho-capitalism friends, you are going to have to accept that this is within the limits of your own ideology. If people voluntarily want to start something together, then you can, by your own definition, not be opposed to that. Some of you already understood that. I had a chat with Michael Shanklin recently, and he finally in the end said, okay, if enough of you want to do that voluntarily, then I couldn't care less. So yeah, oh my God, hallelujah, he accepted that we are allowed voluntarily to make a resource-based economy. Thank you, Mike. So nice of you. Now, those were some of those points that they talked about or that came up over and over again in that video of Mike and Victor and Richard. All of those incorrect associations regarding a natural or resource-based economy. Now, back to this one point that they were actually mainly talking about, which is structural violence. In that video of them, Victor actually started out as the only one of the three who understood and accepted that such a thing as structural violence actually even exists. Mike, I think he wasn't sure in the beginning, or he was more still holding the position that no, structural violence is a non-existing concept. I also remember just a few days ago in a chat with Mike on Facebook, he said explicitly that this is a non-existent concept, structural violence. And well, the third one in the round, Richard, he basically denied the concept completely. So he completely didn't accept that there even is such a thing as structural violence. And in the course of their little circle jerk there, Victor explained to the other two guys actually several correct examples of structural violence in a market economy. And they also talked about structural violence in the state system a lot. And while they did that, Mike began to realize, so like, okay, now I'm talking about structural violence in a state, so actually there is such a thing as structural violence apparently. So he kind of switched somewhere during the video and accepted that yes, structural violence is, of course, a concept that exists. Suddenly it was like, yeah, I've always said that that exists, but it's only in the state system, of course, never in the market economy. And yeah, Richard went on to suddenly be opposed to the other guys, to both of them, and still saying, no, there is no such thing as structural violence, simply doesn't exist. It was pretty amusing to watch. In any case, like I said, Victor was the one who mentioned a few actually accurate examples of structural violence in a market economy. But every time he did, he suddenly added that, of course, they can't be structural violence because the market is non-violent. So even though he mentioned these examples of structural violence in a market, some override in his brain suddenly kicked in, and he said, no, they can't be structural violence after all, because the market is perfect. And well, this is where we get to the point now. If the individual interactions, the trade interactions or the market interactions in a market economy are non-violent, which they say they are, then to Victor that means that there can be no structural violence in a market either. And that is where it starts to make no sense at all anymore, because here he goes completely against the definition of what structural violence actually is. And well, it says, for example, on Wikipedia under structural violence, it says that it's a form of violence where some social structure or social institution may harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. So it doesn't say here that direct violence is required for a system to even be able to be structurally violent. It doesn't say that. It says when the setup of a social structure or a social institution is in such a way that it may harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs, then that is structural violence. And Well, as Victor has now, after the release of their video posted on Facebook, I will read a quote from him now. He said, "I don't have too much of an issue with the sociological concept of structural violence. However, I do think debunking the concept of structural violence as expropriated and misinterpreted by the Zeitgeist movement is essential to promoting voluntarism, since structural violence conflates voluntary economic systems with violence." So what he's, I think, trying to say here is that a voluntary economic system, and he means the market with that, cannot be conflated or cannot be somehow linked to structural violence. So according to him, that is impossible because he defines the market as a voluntary economic system, and therefore to him it's impossible that there is structural violence in the market. Now, I don't even know what to say to this because it's so inherently incorrect. He and all ANCAPs simply define the market as a voluntary system. That is their basic assumption, just because they define it as a system of voluntary, non-violent interactions between individuals. So that means you have all these individual trade or market interactions between individuals, and each one of these is non-violent, is voluntary. So there's one here and here and here, and people just interacting with each other, voluntarily, non-violently. And this results, obviously, as every social system does with enough people, in a huge network, in a social construct, in a social structure, a system, whatever you want to call it. That is, excuse me, so much talking, that is made up of millions or even billions of social interactions, market interactions, whatever you want to call them. And since in a market economy, as defined by anarcho-capitalists, each of these little social interactions is voluntary and non-violent, according to them, the whole structure, the whole construct that results from it must also be non-violent, cannot inherently have any structural violence. And there is no logic in this conclusion. You can't say that because all the individual interactions are voluntary, that there can't be any structural violence. That goes completely against what the definition of structural violence is. The definition of structural violence doesn't require any direct violence between individuals. That is why there's a name for it. That is why there's a definition for structural violence. Sorry. If structural violence required direct violence between individuals, then we wouldn't even need a name for it. We wouldn't even need the concept of structural violence. So, yeah, that's what he, Victor, most of all, and together with Mike in the video, tried to do and is still trying to do right now on Facebook, is trying to redefine structural violence in such a way that it can only be there in a system where there's direct violence, which is not true. You can have, even in theory, if you had a completely non-violent market economy, the way they imagine it, where there are only non-violent voluntary interactions between all the individuals, the structure, the system, can still be structurally violent because it can still restrict access to the necessities of life for a large part of the population there. Yeah, to some degree they even touched on that in their video, which is where it got really funny, when Victor also kind of explained that to the other two guys, when he said, yeah, basically what I just said. Even when all the individual interactions are voluntary and non-violent, there can still be structural violence, like, as they call it, unfortunate things happening to people, like someone starving, even to death maybe. Generally poverty, homelessness, and not even to mention all the wage slavery, all the general slavery going on. Generally people having to do things that they wouldn't voluntarily do if they weren't under the pressure of earning an income. All of that stuff. So yeah, Victor kind of mentioned that or explained it to the other two guys, and then suddenly they switched to saying that structural violence is simply the nature of things, and life is structurally violent. So that was their genius idea, how to, as they think, get out of that now. That they suddenly redefined the whole thing once again and said, well, everything is structural violence. Breathing is structural violence. I seem to remember them saying, or at least writing on Facebook. And yeah, so I think there was also talk about, well, when someone, a girl leaves a boy, for example, leaves her boyfriend, then that's also structural violence. And yeah, they tried to completely redefine the whole thing, so to make it seem that what the Zeitgeist movement is talking about is completely ridiculous, because we're basically talking about everything, and we think that everything is violent, and life is basically violent. And yeah, so they went on to say basically that there's nothing that can be done about structural violence in that regard. And it's just so fucking ridiculous. All these moving the goalpost and changing definitions around. And first there's no structural violence, there's no such thing at all. Then suddenly, yes, of course there is, only the state is structurally violent. And then suddenly, well, everything is structurally violent, and so actually nothing is structurally violent. And yeah, these guys. Yeah, regarding also one of these points I just mentioned, where they were talking about, yes, structural violence does exist, but exists only in the state system, also based on this fallacious notion that I talked about now, that only a system that involves direct violence can also be structurally violent, which is ridiculous. So they said, yeah, because there is direct violence in the state, as like in the form of police violence and wars and all that kind of stuff. That's why the state, yes, the state can also be structurally violent, according to them. At one point they switched that around again to saying taxation and inflation are actually the structural violence in the state. And I'm not laughing because that's not true. That is actually correct, I would say. Those are forms of structural violence in the state. I just find it funny how they kept redefining it from, well, every 5 minutes basically they had a different definition for structural violence. And it's also interesting to note that even if we accepted this completely ridiculous notion that only a system that involves direct violence between individuals can also be structurally violent, so even if we accepted that, then I would also like to point out that the market economy actually creates direct violence. You may have heard of things like theft, robbery, that often results even in physical harm, even in murder, in death. So these are things that the market creates through access restriction, through artificial scarcity, because some people, many people in the market economy are just don't have their basic needs fulfilled. That is the structural violence of the market as defined by the definition of what structural violence is. That a system, I can read it again from here, a system, a social institution may harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. So the mere fact that in a market economy many people will simply not have the money that they need for their basic needs, to even buy just food. Others may be able to just buy food, but won't have enough purchasing power to satisfy other needs. And those people, in many cases, will be desperate enough, or will just say, well, fuck it, there's a rich guy, I'll take it from him. And anarcho-capitalists will accept that is direct violence. Of course, then they're going to say, well, that's only because of the state. They're even going to say that before they even think about it, and then they're going to just try to come up with how that can again be the fault of the state. I don't know what they would say. Probably, yeah, there are only poor people because of taxes or something. Yeah, if taxes didn't exist, then of course magically everyone would be rich. I seriously doubt that. It actually makes no sense at all, because it is inherent to a market economy. It's structurally inherent to a market economy that there will be social stratification, that there will be rich and poor. And even just the fact that obviously some people will always be super successful because they have one great idea, or because they're lucky, or through whichever means they become rich and successful, already creates social stratification. Even if everyone else wasn't starving, that would mean that some people would be super rich and some would not be. And that would even be the best case scenario, which would be completely unrealistic even in a market economy. But even if it were only that would also mean trouble, because if you have super rich and if you have well, I don't know what to call them, like a middle class that is not the middle anymore, but is actually the lowest class, but all of them are doing okay, and then there are some that are super rich, then it still creates problems. So even if you were to grant this absolute minimum of social stratification, which is completely unrealistic, there would still be tensions in society, because some people would be rich and would have access to all of that stuff, could do things that the normal people couldn't do. And as we know from social studies, like the ones from Richard Wilkinson are very well known, any of that kind of social stratification creates negative health effects for everyone, for the rich and the poor. So yeah, and like I said, this best case scenario, if you will, in a market economy is completely unrealistic, because there's just absolutely no basis to assume that even a completely free market economy would somehow magically not create those lower classes anymore, those poor people and starving people. Of course, then what they do, what anarcho-capitalists do when you mention that, is they say charity. So yeah, we can give charity to all those poor people and that will solve everything, kind of. Well, what I say to that is, when you say that, you basically admit that your system, your market economy is flawed, because it has built into it, first of all, the creation of poor people, and as a solution to that, the need to give charity to them. I mean, if you already admit that there's inherently this flaw in your system, then then you have admitted that it's basically crap. And excuse me, I usually don't talk that much, so it's not good for my throat here. So it's basically admitted that the social stratification is created through even a free market economy, and must be solved by charity. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not that's not going to the roots of the problem. That's not creating a system that works. That is just patchwork solution, which is also just an assumption that enough people would give charity to all the poor people created. Like I said, that's just an assumption based on nothing. You just assume that, and then that's your solution. So yeah, I guess that pretty much covered it all. I would just like to re-emphasize the main point here, which is about structural violence, about the, I think at this time when I'm recording the video, the current attempt to twist it somehow in the way that they say only a system with direct individual violence can also be structurally violent. Once again, that is bullshit. Look at the definition of structural violence. It clearly says that structural violence is defined as a system, or happens by definition in a system that restricts people's access to necessities of life. It doesn't say anywhere that you must have single elements of individual direct violence in that system for it to be structurally violent. That would be pointless. Then that would negate the whole definition of structural violence. So I like this metaphor for the people who understand metaphors. Take as an example, which is of course it works like a metaphor. It's not an example from real life, but take 10 people that agree to voluntarily to be locked up in a big room for, let's say, a month, and after they get locked in there, they agree on the rules by which to manage their food that they have in there. And they have available to them at the beginning twice as much food as they would need to feed each of them and all of them for the whole month. That is there. Now, what they do is they come up with this little set of rules that says every day all 10 of them have to compete against each other in a variety of different games, sports, mental games, a combination of physical and brain stuff, if you will. And each day a top 10 or a ranking list of those 10 people will be created from the results of these games, and according to those results the food will be distributed in that room. And the rules are also set up in such a way that the winner each day gets 50% of all the food, and kind of like a little exponential curve, everyone gets gradually less, and the let's say the 2 or 3 losers every day get nothing at all. Of course, as you can imagine, after 2 or 3 days, those that didn't get a lot of food in the first 2 days start to become weaker physically, maybe also mentally, and will perform even worse in the games, and yeah, they're basically dead after a few days. And yeah, that's a little metaphor for the market economy, because there is no direct violence in this metaphor, in this house. No one between these 10 people actually kills another one. No one hurts another one. They just set up the rules in such a way that those who win the game, and those games are also completely non-violent, of course, the winners of the game get to eat and the losers get to die. And that's just how the game, the rules of the game are set up. And with another set of rules, another rule book in the same house, with the same people, with the same amount of initial food and the same time period, you could simply say that every day each of them gets twice as much food as they need, and they would perfectly survive, all 10 of them, over the whole month. Simply by using another set of rules, which is also completely non-violent, also completely voluntary, like the other one. But in this one, where we say everyone every day gets twice as much food as they want, because that's what they're, everyone survives. With the other rule set, which is also directly non-violent, there is structural violence, which is in the rules of the game, in the structure. The rule set is the structure. And in the structure, it is simply defined that there are winners and losers every day, and it is simply defined that the winners get most of the food. Then from 2nd to 7th place, you get some of the food, and 8th to 10th place, you get nothing. And there, once again, I would like to emphasize this. There is no direct violence in this idea, in this rule book. They all compete in non-violent games against each other. But because they have set up the system in such a way, the structure in this idiotic way, there is now structural violence that makes some of them starve. So no, once again, you do not need direct violence in a system for it to be structurally violent. And Victor, Mike, maybe even Richard, or any other fans of the idea of free market anarcho-capitalism, I don't know if I should even ask you to maybe try to understand this, but that is what structural violence is. That is what the structural violence in the market economy works like. And it works even in your proposed completely non-violent, voluntary, free market economy. Even then, it will be there. It would be there. It will never be there, because I'm an optimist, and I choose to believe that such a world will never come to be. But even if it would be extremely structurally violent. Whereas, if we just decided to use another set of rules, like a natural law resource-based economy, that would also be completely non-violent, completely voluntary, it would just work differently. Would work in a way that is fair for everyone, that gives everyone much more access to the resources that are there, to all the food and clothes and homes and energy and transportation and education and everything that is there. Simply because the people understand that that would be better for themselves, in their own best self-interest, and for everyone at the same time. great concept, huh? Can be the best for themselves and also the best for everyone else. Then that will reduce the structural violence greatly. And I also want to point this out. Yes, structural violence, in a way, if you want to say it like that, is life and will always be there to a degree. But we as humans have the ability to think about a system that reduces structural violence to the achievable minimum at any given time. What we can't do better than we can do at any given time, but there are now at least these two obviously or apparently conflicting ideas of a free market economy and of a natural law resource-based economy. And it is possible to simply look at them, to analyze them, and to say, yes, we both don't want state control. Let's agree that we want to get rid of that. But then economically, what do we do? What works best? Does a market economy work better than a natural law resource-based economy? In a market economy, we can absolutely assume safely that there will be social stratification. There will be poor. There will be those who will not have their needs fulfilled. A resource-based economy doesn't have that. And here we're talking about the way the two systems are defined. I'm accepting your most ideal version of what you propose. A free market economy without any state. That's what you propose. You're not saying there won't be poverty. You're saying, well, we're assuming that will be solved by charity. Okay. So I am taking your idea and putting it opposite the natural law resource-based economy idea. So I would also ask you not to twist our idea, because I'm not twisting your idea. I'm taking what you are proposing, comparing it to what we are proposing. And what we are proposing is a voluntary cooperative of people who want to voluntarily cooperate and share, and who, by doing so, will all have their basic needs met. So when we compare these two systems, both voluntary, both non-violent, both without the state, yours, that according to you, ANCAPs, creates social stratification, poverty. Ours, according to the definition of a natural law resource-based economy, doesn't do that. Yours will require people to work for income. Ours won't. So I don't know. This is probably pointless for you, the people I'm addressing, but maybe someone else can learn something from this, which is a simple fact that let's try to reduce structural violence as much as we can by simply choosing the best possible economic system at any given time, the best we can do. And clearly, if your mind isn't completely locked in this idea that the market is perfect because the individual interactions are non-violently, and that is all that we need, and that automatically means that it can't be bad. If you're not locked in that idea and locked in praxeology, and if you actually will let in new information and will let in logic and empirical evidence and simply look at things and think about things for a minute, then I don't know how you can not understand that the natural law resource-based economy is by far the better of the two systems in every regard, in individuality, individualism, in voluntarism, in freedom. Simply the freedom of all the free time that you have. Like when you compare that you would probably have similar working hours, or let's say, let's even grant the ANCAPs that you would only have to work 20 hours a week because taxes are gone, and somehow that results in everyone needing only half the money. Okay, so you only have to work 20 hours a week. In a resource-based economy, you're gonna have to work not at all because you have to do nothing, but you will voluntarily understand that you want to contribute something to society, and if you contribute 1 or 2 hours a week, it will be enough, because most work's gonna be automated, and the little bit of work that still is left for humans will be much less than humans actually want to work, because no one just, or most people won't even want to work as little as 2 hours per week. Most want to do more, I guess, and that is why you can also assume that in an NLRBE there will be a lot more innovation and new inventions being made, and new ideas being developed for how we can make things even better, because people, if you just had your 2 hours on Monday morning and now you're done and it's Monday noon and you're done for the rest of the week, then of course you're gonna enjoy your life most of that time and just be with your family and, I don't know, read and travel. But a lot of people will find it enjoyable in their life to, after those, just assuming 2 hours are done, that are also voluntary, you will still want to contribute something. You will sit there and think about, how could we make things even better? Where are there little problems left that could still be solved? Like, where's a disease that I could heal, or a technical efficiency that I could increase? Anything like that. You don't have any of that freedom in a market economy if you already have the structural pressure to work at least several days a week. Then most of the time that remains, you will not spend working. You will spend, like I said, with your family and following your hobbies or whatever. But it is so obvious that freed people freed from all the mundane labor and all the pressure to earn money will be much more likely, simply because they have more time and have more open source knowledge at their hands and more resources at their hands to start new things. They will be much more likely to innovate more. So yeah, like I said, if you're in any way not stuck in some praxeological or indoctrinated belief about a market economy, just look at these two systems that I talked about here, compare them for yourself, and just decide for yourself which one you would like to live in. And then if you can find the time and the energy while we're in this system now, try to contribute something to a value shift towards that system that you prefer. Yeah, I guess that's what I have to say, what I wanted to say today. I know which one it is, obviously, that I prefer, and maybe this was able to help a few people think about these topics and make up their mind in the end about which proposed system they prefer. And now I'm gonna drink a glass of water because my throat hurts from all the talking, and I hope I'll see you soon. And bye and peace.